Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 3818. Today's date is January 14, 2026. It's been almost like a night at exactly 10:19 p.m. Alright, yeah, let's just jump into the question. Alright, okay. The question is, what if animal reveal secrets? Okay, that's a really good question. First of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is always been really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like forced me to think about that reality. When I try to think about that reality or when I try to create that reality inside of my mind, I'm kind of like utilizing my knowledge, information and experience that I've been through. And somehow it kind of like felt good. Disclaimer: the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It's a raw, it's unfiltered, it's just my opinion. So do not believe in any kind of like information that I am saying or do not seek for any kind of like information that I am saying. It's just my opinion and opinion are subjective. Now regarding about the question says that what if animal reveal the secrets? Now, this kind of like is really funny, interesting, and really, I don't know, like I kind of like a somebody like I already give the answer regarding about this question, but the question is kind of like somebody talk very differently. Like basically, what if the animal could supposed to be talk and things and that and that. Now, if the animal could kind of like reveal the secret, well, first of all, is that ki if I could understand that if the animal could kind of like simply talk and reveal the secret, then what would be that particular scenario? Um, Probably is this thing that the way that we live the life, the way that our perspective looking at the world might be changed according to the different animal. Extreme. Okay, example is this thing that a bird, okay, yeah, a bird might just tell us regarding about the regarding about how the kind of like a planet look like. Okay, yeah, not look like, it's like, okay, it's kind of like a thing that it's very hard to describe regarding about particular stuff, but is this thing that the way that we look our planet and the way that the animal sees the planet is kind of like a very different. Okay, uh um I don't know. At the moment, I'm just kind of like somebody guessing. I was kind of like understanding things and that, but I'm. I just my head is kind of like completely blank. I'm just not really sure what kind of like animal could kind of like give any kind of like information and things and that and that. But still, is this thing if I kind of like think about possible point of perspective? Okay, yeah, like I would gonna go like a little bit deeper, but probably is this thing it really required a lot of knowledge and things like that, and I don't really have that much information regarding about animal that much. There are a couple of animals that I have a little bit of information, but this is a what if scenario regarding about what if the animals or any kind of like a species would kind of like a talk to us and kind of like a give us the information or reveal the secrets on things and that and that. First of all, it's kind of like a really hard to believe when this actually happened. Because of that key, let me tell you one thing, that the communication, the way that we are doing communication is like the like we cannot do a communication with another species. And why is that? Because nature not allow us to do that thing. What do you mean? Like, okay, what is at least this thing? If I am the nature, okay, so it's really essential to me to kind of like assembly the one species can communicate, another species also communicate, but they shouldn't supposed to be communicate with each other. Now why? Like let's just say I am a human and there is a dog. Okay, so if I am the kind of like a nature, then I would let human to human communicate, I would let dog to dog communicate, but I would not let human to dog communicate. But why is not, why is that? Because of that ki probably is this thing that ki a natural selection process. Okay, I don't know how to supposed to explain. It's a very weird and very kind of like I don't know. It's a very okay. Yeah. Example. Okay, I'm trying to understanding the concept. I'm not really sure the information that I was gonna say. Okay, yeah. You are human. Okay, yeah, and you are. There are so many things that you have. There are so many things that you don't have, and there are so many things that dog have, and there are so many things that dog doesn't really have. Okay, yeah. But there is a one thing common that ki the dog and human are communicate. Okay, I'm gonna kind of like take this scenario and kind of like simply understand the evolution will gonna happen if the dog and human would gonna talk and each other. Okay, first of all is that let's understand the human communication. Human communication is evolved throughout the kind of like assembly the way that we communicate. Okay, like it's not really happened that suddenly human is actually evolved and we are started talking in English or any kind of like a language. No, language is not even kind of like simply established and things like that. First of all, the way that we actually communicate, the humans are actually started communication by visual communication. Now, visual communication means what? Like no means no, yes means yes. Yeah, these are kind of like visual communication that doesn't really require any kind of like a language and things like that. Okay, yeah. And we slowly kind of like develop little bit of language from visual communication to kind of like simply talk and things and that and that. Evolution change, and throughout the evolution we kind of like utilize our tongue not to use for just for kind of like simply the understanding the taste of that particular fruits and things like that, but we could kind of like simply talk. We could kind of like emit some sort of sound that other human might gonna understand and things like that. Okay, and since then kind of like we establish the communication. Okay, we build up language and things and that and that. Now let's just imagine that the dog are also kind of like went through same process. Okay, yeah. Now there is a one kind of like a millions of million after millions of million. The kind of like a one human are kind of like a talking to dog. Okay, yeah, and they can able to be talk. Okay, yeah. Now what exactly happened? Okay, yeah. Now a human can able to be kind of like a talk to the dog. Now if such thing will gonna happen, then probably is this thing that ki human will gonna say this thing to dog that ki listen dog, I cannot able to be run like you. Okay, yeah, because I am not faster. Okay, also I don't really have that much fur, so that's why I cannot able to be surviving cold winter and nothing really at all. Okay, yeah, I also need a food for survive and things like that. So would you kind of like assembly come with us and kind of like a hunt together? So you actually kind of like a talk to the dog because of that key. I wanted to hunt, and because of I am not able to kind of like a run and things like that. So would you help me? If you help me, then probably is this thing we will gonna share 50-50. Okay, yeah. So I will gonna take 50% of the meat and you will also get 50% of the meat. Now this kind of like a deal is actually happened, and when the deal is actually happened, you and your dog is actually went to hunting. Now you actually hunt and you kind of like a share the food together. Okay, yeah. Now because of this thing, you actually solved one of the biggest problem, food. Okay, yeah. Because of you are kind of like somebody getting the food, so it's kind of like somebody very easy for you. Okay, yeah. Now when it's became really easy for you, then what exactly happened that you will not gonna collaborate with another human. Now why is that? Because let me tell you one thing, in our timeline, okay, in real timeline, we are cannot able to do hunt alone, so that's why we kind of like a collaborate with another human, and that another human are kind of like a combine and we could kind of like a hunt together. But in this reality is this thing that we are collaborating with not another human, we are collaborating with the dog. Okay, yeah, a dog species. And when we are kind of like collaborating with a dog species, then probably this collaboration, the human to human collaboration will not gonna happen. Means like that a human have a best friend of dog. Okay, yeah, because it kind of like a solve two problem. First problem is that you will not gonna you will get the food as well as a dog gets the food too. Okay, yeah. Now this is something happened when this thing actually happened, then it kind of like eliminate all the necessary innovation that it should supposed to be happen. Let me tell you one thing. When humans to humans are actually collaborate, we are not just kind of like we solve the problem of hunting, we actually solve the problem of kind of like a leadership. We solve the problem of family. We also solve the problem of kind of like agriculture and things and that and that. There are so many things are actually started when humans are actually connect with another human, and basically this thing we kind of like establish the kind of like a group, then kind of like a simply the bigger group, villages and things and that, and it kind of like a build us a strong community of the human and things like that. But if the dog and kind of like a something the humans are kind of like a became the best friend, they don't really require any kind of like a something groups to establish and things like that. Nothing really at all, because I am a human, so I'm kind of like a utilizing my hand and kind of like a leg to kind of like a create the trap and things like that. Now dog are meant to be kind of like a do little bit of hard work. Like basically it's just think that key I will act as a bait, and probably the kind of like a another kind of like animal, let's just say kind of like a rabbit or another kind of like a deer or things like that, would come to me because of I'm kind of like a somebody suffering from like a lot of blood and things like that. Those are blood, are fake blood and things like that. Now that kind of like a somebody deer would came, then dog would attack that bear, and suddenly I wake up and I will attack that bear too. So we both attack the bear at the same time and we get the food, right? So this is what it is. So basically is this thing na ki because of this collaboration we don't really require another human, and when we don't really require another human, then probably the evolution, the human evolution will not gonna happen, right? So there is no kind of like a somebody the like yeah, like most of the kind of like human evolution actually happened because of we actually gather together and things and that and that. But why do you say that? Why do you say that? Like basically is this thing, why not kind of like a somebody human will kind of like a somebody connect with another human and things like that? Like when the dog is actually communicate, then probably it's really good now. Then we should supposed to be kind of like a bring another human, bring another dog and things like that. We would kind of like a build up even more bigger community and things like that, right? But that is a kind of like a something very different thing. Let me tell you one thing. A dog can eat food very lot. A human cannot able to be eat that much. Also another thing is that ki a dog is a kind of like a something carnivorous, because at that time dog was kind of like a considered as a fox and things like that. But so it can digest a kind of like a somebody the meat and things like that. But our human body are not able to digest that kind of like a strong meat and things like that. So as well as is this thing that ki because of our kind of like a digestive system and things are a bit more different and things like that. So it's not really good for kind of like a something is this thing that that collaboration would kind of like a somebody go even more longer time. Also lifespan. Okay, dogs could kind of like a live for at least like a for 30 to 40 year. Okay, probably I'm not really sure exact number. And human could supposed to be live for at least like a at that time probably 30 40, yeah, not 30 40, yeah, like at that time like a millions of year ago, the average lifespan of the human is almost like a 30 to 40, yeah, that is true by the way. Okay, yeah, the lifespan is kind of like simply equal and things like that, but still is this thing that key entire body structure and the necessity of the food is a kind of like a bit more different. Like let me tell you one thing that key when we kind of like a hunt together, whatever the food that I get, that food is kind of like a convenient for me. Even if I get 50% of the food, it's kind of like a only convenient for me to kind of like a survive for at least like a 2-3 days. Means like that I 2-3 days I don't need to kind of like a go to the hunting and things like that, because this 50% food that I have, which kind of like I had enough to kind of like a survive for 2-3 days. But for the dog, no, they are kind of like a eat that food on that time and they need another food. And basically is this thing, if you don't really require another food, then why would you supposed to kind of like assembly the kind of like assembly put your life on the line put your life in that danger and kind of like assembly hunt another thing, things like that, because you have collaboration? It's not. Okay, yeah, so probably is this thing, if I try to imagine a possible scenario, then probably is this thing that key it's not possible. Okay, yeah, that kind of like assembly the collaboration will not gonna kind of like last longer and things and that. Probably it kind of like a solve kind of like a just it's a kind of like a temporary problem we're gonna solve. You will kind of like get the food for kind of like a little bit period of time, but then after that it's not. Definitely not. And for that particular situation, if the kind of like if we kind of like include more people or more dog into this particular situation, then it will also kind of like a create and chaos in this particular group. Because let's just say that if I'm gonna say two people are actually two people and two dog are kind of like a come together and kind of like a bringing a food and kind of like a hunting the food and things like that, then probably the two dogs that they are kind of like eating too much amount of food. That probably is this thing that ki human says, dude, you actually ate too much amount of food, and basically is this thing that the whatever food that we have, which is kind of like a had enough, we don't really require any kind of like a something another, we don't really require a kind of like a food for hunt and things like that, because we already have too much. Then dog gonna say, why would you not, like a, we are kind of like a lot of food and we need food, so you need to come with us and things like that. So it's kind of like a create the same problem and things and that and that. Okay, this is the one scenario. The another scenario is that why does nature doesn't really wants you to kind of like a talk another like a, why does nature kind of like a not letting to talk with another species and things like that, is because of the different perspective. Let me tell you one thing. Nature has a kind of like a law that the natural selection process. Okay, what's the natural selection process? The natural selection process means like that a particular species is only species would able to be survive, that able to be survive. Like basically is just saying the people, the species who able to be kind of like somebody survive in the situation, that species will kind of like somebody evolve, populate, reproduce and things and that. I also as a nature will kind of like somebody let that species kind of like somebody live even more longer for millions of years and things like that. Also I will gonna give the upgrades regarding about they should supposed to survive and things like that. When that particular species are not able to be survive, then probably it's not really good and things like that. Now let me tell you one thing. We are humans and possibly is this thing that key from every possible perspective we are not able to kind of like simply survive in every possible way. Why? Because we cannot able to run faster, we do not have that much amount of fur, we do not have that much amount of strength so that we were supposed to attack any kind of like animal and things like that. Also our digestive system is also not really good so that we should supposed to eat meat and things like that. So possible situation is this thing that ki we are a very worst species as a human are kind of like a very worst species to kind of like a survive in this particular wilderness and things like that. So if such thing will gonna happen, the human will kind of like a somebody the like a dissolve in the planet Earth, because of that ki humans are not able to be survive that much. Okay, and if the kind of like a dog will kind of like a talk, if they are kind of like a communicate and things and that, then probably their chances would be survive is even more lesser than that. Okay, yeah. So it is really essential to be that ki the kind of like a somebody human should supposed to be utilize their brain for kind of like a survive and things like that. And for that utilizing brain, they need a kind of like a information regarding about living together and understanding and communications and things and that and that. And for that particular process, human as a kind of like a human should supposed to be communicate with the human, as a human shouldn't supposed to communicate with another dog species, because it kind of like a create the danger and things like that. So as a nature are kind of like allows to kind of like assembly in species they could communicate, but like like another species they cannot. So that's why probably is this thing when we kind of like a we kind of like somebody see the kind of like a dog barking and things and that which don't really understand and things like that. But I think that na ki it's not a kind of like a somebody. I think that na this statement is a kind of like a little bit wrong regarding about that ki nature are not let communicate to the another species and things like that, because in every scenario this might be a kind of like a very difficult situation, because I seen there is a kind of like a somebody, so many humans are actually controlling the dog and things like that. They actually train the dog regarding about things and that, even if they don't really understand their language and things, but still we have a lot of kind of like people who kind of like train the dog very much properly and things and that. So probably is this thing that it's not kind of like some nature are not let us to kind of like somebody talk to the any kind of like a species and things like that. But still it's a very hard to explain regarding about that particular stuff. But still is this thing that what if kind of like a human and animal would kind of like a talk and reveal their secrets and things like that. What if such thing will gonna happen? first of all, it kind of like a create and chaos. Okay, another first of all is that I'm actually thinking from every possible point of perspective. Like basically, I would not even think about that suddenly that animal could talk with the humans and things like that. No, I'm not believing that kind of like some magic that suddenly kind of like animals started talking. It is kind of like a very weird concept and things like that. It kind of like a went through friction concept and things. If I wanted to imagine this particular scenario, then I would kind of like imagine the scenario from the beginning of the humankind, beginning of the kind of like some evolution and things like that. Then I would started thinking like that. Like basically is this thing that if the animal would kind of like a talk with each other and things and that, and then when what would be that stuff and what would be that. It's kind of like simply very easy to understand regarding about if the animal could talk to each other and things like that. Like there is a kind of like a movie name. I am not really sure Robert Downey Jr. name. Robert Downey Jr. was actor in that particular movie. He could kind of like a talk to the animal and things like that, which is kind of like a somewhat something funny and friction kind of like a stuff. But nature point of perspective, it's not really possible in every possible way. I don't know. It's just my point of perspective. I'm not really sure regarding about that, but I think that possible is this thing that sometime what if scenario is a kind of like somebody push us to kind of like think about that point of perspective. But when I try to think about that point of perspective, I realize that it's not possible. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, is this thing that like okay, let me tell you one thing. There is so many stuff. Okay, yeah, let's just say how do you supposed to talk to the fish? Okay, now basically first of all is that does fish talk? Like this kind of a question that we should supposed to be asked. Now even if the kind of like a fish can talk, then you have to understand that the frequency that they kind of like a talk. Like basically is this thing, the kind of like somebody the way that we talk, we could understand. It really required kind of like a some impact on kind of like a some sound effects and things like that. Sound effect means what? Like basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing that when I kind of like a somebody speak anything or things like that, I'm kind of like a somebody create a kind of like a somebody wavelength in the medium, in air medium. Okay, yeah. Like basically is this thing that we are actually kind of like a somebody communicate is because of the medium that we have. Okay, yeah, and that medium is air medium. Okay, yeah. We cannot able to kind of like a somebody speak in vacuum because vacuum doesn't really have anything. So we need a kind of like a medium. Okay, yeah. Another thing is that what if how do we supposed to kind of like a simply communicate through fish? Now fish is a kind of like a communicate through water, and we cannot able to be kind of like a communicate, we cannot able to kind of like a simply listen in kind of like a in water and things like that. How do we supposed to come, because we cannot able to breathe and things and that. Another thing is that fish could able to be speak very 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 slowly, or maybe kind of like a very kind of like a somebody, so like the volume of the fish is kind of like a very low. I'm just kind of like a thinking, I'm not really sure, might be very low that I might not heard, I will not gonna heard anything that what the fish will gonna say and things like that. Okay, one thing. Another thing is that um like just say ant. Okay, yeah, if the ant would kind of like able to be speak, then how the ant would able to be communicate with me? uh the ant will kind of like communicate very rapidly, like basically it kind of say kuch, 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 kuch. Now this is kind of like the way that ant would kind of like speak very fastly is because of that the size of the ant, because ant is kind of like a very tiny, and because of it tiny, it kind of like somebody speak in its kind of like a normal language, but normal speed. But because of I am kind of like a much more bigger in size, so probably I'm not able to be kind of like a things. It's kind of like a things that now a kind of like a somebody, the way that the way that we see ant is kind of like a somebody running very fast or walking really fast or kind of like a doing anything kind of like a really fast and things like that. But it's not kind of like they are kind of like running really fast and things like that. They are kind of like somebody is this thing that their perspective is a kind of like a bit more different. Now because of when we change the perspective, we cannot able to be kind of like understand the language, or maybe I don't know how do I supposed to explain this thing at the moment, but it's a very different thing. Another thing is that a communication really required not only just a kind of like a way that we talk, really impact on lot of things. I don't know. Yeah, but even if I kind of I don't know, it just might be I'm kind of like a thinking from very wrong point of perspective, or maybe I am not able to be kind of like a thing that what if kind of like a somebody the animal would able to be kind of like a somebody communicate and things and that, or reveal the secrets probably. First of all is that ki communicate is a kind of like a far more kind of like a simply unimaginable concept, but I don't know. But whatever, this is just my opinion regarding about that. Whatever, I should supposed to end here. This is it, this end, and thank you.